Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Chairman, Sheikh, distinguished scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I always listen carefully to the introductions. And when Brother Munawar said that I had a grasp of languages, I almost had to correct him, but he corrected himself. So don't expect me to speak to you in your languages, for I have a grasp only of the English language. But mashallah, I think I can speak it quite well. And I fastened on the word that Brother Munawar used instinctively. You'll see that I have no notes. If you've watched on YouTube, you'll see I never have any notes, whether I'm speaking to the US Senate or the House of Commons or anywhere, because I'm talking instinctively. So what is my instinct? Well, I was born in a very working class Scottish town, all white, when I was born there. No people of color of any kind, no Muslims of any kind. I was 20 years old before I met the first Muslim, and what a significant one he turned out to be. But I was in Dundee because my grandparents had come in their bare feet on a cattle boat as immigrants from Ireland, landed in Glasgow at Anderston Quay with the cattle, without shoes, and some of them, alhamdulillah, lived long enough to see me elected as the Member of Parliament for Anderston Quay, where their ship had landed in Glasgow. They walked 80 miles from Glasgow to Dundee. They worked from 6 in the morning until 6 in the evening for 10 shillings and 9pence for the younger amongst you. That's just over 50 pence a week. In the jute and flax mills, the raw material from which came from some of your countries, especially what is now Bangladesh, was then Pakistan, and where the workers, of course, worked even harder and for less. That gives me two instincts. My first instinct is that I'm always with the working people, with the poor people, with the immigrant people, with the people without shoes. I'm never with the people who own the mill and try to make their workers work as long and for as little as possible. My second instinct comes from my Irish background. Ireland was our first colony. 800 years the British, first the English, then with the Scottish in partnership, occupied Ireland and still occupy a quarter of Ireland today. Once I came home and told my Irish grandfather that the teacher had told us that the British had an empire so vast that upon it the sun never set. And my grandfather answered, "That's because God would never trust the British in the dark." And I never had any cause to doubt him. God was right about that, as all things. That's my second instinct. I hate empire. Somebody asked me once, "What do you mean all this? What do you keep using this word imperialism? What does it mean?" I told them, well, I could give you the long answer or the short. Many people have written many big books explaining imperialism. But George Orwell, the great English novelist, in his very first novel, Burmese Days, drawing on his experience as a colonial official in Burma, was asked the very same question by a young woman. She said, what is this imperialism you're talking about? He said, imperialism is going to other people's countries, killing them and stealing their things. That's what empire was, what empire is, and what empire always will be. And it's true that from this small island and the small building in which I work and have sat for now almost 27 years, from that small building, a quarter of the land mass of the whole world was governed. And 1/3 of all humanity was governed from that small building. And the purpose of that empire was to steal the things that belonged to the people whom they ruled. We hear all sorts of rubbish, including sometimes surprisingly from citizens of the former empire, especially older ones who've done very well. Oh, it was better when the British were here. When the British arrived in Bengal, just to choose one, when the British arrived in Bengal, it was the richest place on the earth. And when the British left Bengal, it was the poorest place on the earth. And you don't have to be Einstein to work out what happened in between. The British stole everything that they could carry. They forbid anything that would challenge their economic domination, hegemony of their empire. Which is why in Bradford and places like it, huge textile industries were developed using the raw materials coming from the empire. But the empire was forbidden to develop textile industries of their own. And in the case of our empire and others, not content with stealing everything that we could carry, we even stole the people and carried them in the holds of ships, chained, dying in huge numbers like flies on board the slaving boats which carried them from Africa to what we called the New World. Of course, it wasn't a new world, it had always been there. It's just a world that we discovered was ripe for our exploitation. And when you see a black person in the United States of America or in the Caribbean or in Britain, you should know that for the vast majority of those, they are here because we were there and because we stole their grandfathers, their great-grandfathers, as slaves, working as beasts of burden. So these are my instincts, and they explain why on a very fateful day in 1977, summer's day, when I was alone in the Labour Party office in Dundee. I joined the Labour Party at the age of 13. I was working in the office, my arms were covered in ink. I was working on one of these old-fashioned Gestetner duplicators. You're too young to remember them, but now that's how we had to produce leaflets at that time. Someone was ringing instinctively on the doorbell. I wasn't going to answer, but he persisted, which is the first lesson. He rang and rang until I could ignore it no more. And when I answered it, a young man who looked like Omar Sharif, at that time all Arabs looked like Omar Sharif. Sheikh Saab still does. And he said, I'm from the General Union of Palestinian Students at the local Dundee University. And I want to talk to one of the leaders about Palestine. I was 20 years old. I said, there are no leaders here, but you can talk to me and I'll talk to them. Second lesson, he took the only option that was on offer. He didn't say, well, I'll come back then. If you're not a leader, I'm not talking to you. He talked to me. And my goodness, I've been talking ever since to leaders and anyone else who will listen. Over 2 hours, this young man talked to me in mesmerizing imagery and detail about the Nakba, the catastrophe which had enveloped his country, wiped it from the map, and scattered its people to the four corners of the earth. He talked to me about the refugee camps in which millions of Palestinians lived. He talked about the grim Arab dictatorships who regularly massacred and chased and hunted and harried the Palestinian people whilst pretending a fidelity to the cause of returning them. He talked to me about the state that they called Israel, which had replaced his country, and how its occupation of people's own houses and lands was a daily reality. He talked to me about refugees who could actually see their own houses, see foreigners living in them from New York and London, Paris, Moscow, picking their oranges from their trees, playing in their gardens, whilst they lived in refugee camps, in squalor and subject to brutal repression. By the end of that 2 hours, I was a signed up member of the Palestinian resistance. And by the grace of God, I remain so until this day. And the last word on my lips, if I can arrange it, will be Palestine. Because this great crime that was committed against the Palestinian people has a number of dimensions which are sacred to me. First of all, they were authored by my country. In the building that I've been sitting for 27 years, the entire Palestinian disaster was written in a declaration by the British Foreign Minister Arthur Balfour, who declared in his famous Balfour Declaration that he was giving a land which did not belong to him to another people who did not, in fact, even represent anything but a minority of the Jewish people at that time, the land which belonged to a third people. One people giving to a second people the land of a third people. Even by empire standards, this was a brazen crime. Not least because Britain did not even possess Palestine as a colonial possession at the point at which it gave it away. A quick bracket, parenthesis here, is this, that the Zionists to whom Balfour gave Palestine had no particular wish for their state to be formed in Palestine, something that very few people understand. All of the Zionist leaders, all of them, to a man, were atheists. None of them had any religious tie or felt any call to be living in Palestine. All they wanted was to establish a European colonial state for the Jews living in Europe. And to that end, they had been negotiating with the British for decades, ever since the foundation conference of the Zionist movement, some 20 years or more before, negotiating with the British for any piece of land that the British would give them on which they could found their state of Israel. The Seychelles, Madagascar, Uganda, Patagonia in Argentina, all of these were seriously negotiated by the Zionist leadership as a place where Israel could be founded. I dwell on that because nowadays we are asked to believe that we must accept a Zionist state in Palestine because of a historic Jewish religious connection to that land. Well, it has nothing to do with that. Apart from anything else, almost all Israelis are not religious at all, as anyone who's ever been on the beach in Tel Aviv could testify. There's nothing religious about most Israelis. And many of the most religious are against Israel. The most Orthodox realize that actually the foundation of a political Zionist state is forbidden to them religiously. And some of them live in London. You can talk to them. The Tory Carter is the most prominent amongst the organizations. But there are many in Jerusalem and elsewhere who don't regard themselves as Israeli and who consider that the very existence of a state of Israel is itself a blasphemy against Judaism. Which leads me to an important point. I don't need, I'm sure, in this intelligent congregation to labor this point. But it is important for those outside who will see the film of this. We have nothing against Jews. Nothing. In fact, we are forbidden to have anything against Jews. We are obliged to respect Jews and Judaism. We are against Zionism, which is a political, racist ideology, which is rejected by many Jews, both secular and religious. So the first dimension, explaining my lifelong commitment, now almost 40 years, to this cause, is that my country caused it. And if I will not struggle against the consequences of crimes committed by my country, who will? I've never believed this idiotic notion of my country right or wrong. If my country is wrong, it is my responsibility before anyone else's to speak out against it and say so. The second dimension is religious. Like all of you, I'm a believer. I believe in God. The holy places in Palestine are under foreign military occupation. And here I digress, but I must, because some of you will want to talk about things like Syria in the Q&A. I cannot understand how it is possible that 1.7 billion Muslims in the world can so easily tolerate a foreign kuffar occupation of Jerusalem, of Al-Aqsa itself, from whence the Prophet ascended to heaven and returned with a part of the revelation. This mosque is occupied by foreign soldiers speaking in American or Russian accents, carrying American paid weaponry, regularly attacking the haram, the compound in which the Dome on the Rock and the Al-Aqsa are situated. They forbid men under the age of 50 from praying there, even on the holiest occasions. They regularly shoot and arrest those who are praying, those who've made it to the mosques. How come there are so many Muslims ready to make what they call jihad anywhere except Jerusalem? They're ready to kill innocent people in London, on the underground and on buses. They're ready to massacre people in Aleppo or Damascus. But ask them to go and help liberate Jerusalem, you don't see many of them queuing up for a ticket. It is wajib. It is incumbent. It is an obligation to us to free the holy city of Jerusalem. And for a Muslim, there can be surely nothing more important than the liberation of Jerusalem. There are many territories in the world that need to be liberated, don't get me wrong. I'm for liberating most of them. But why don't we start with Palestine? And the third dimension is the humanitarian one, about which I could speak for the rest of the night and all of tomorrow. The Palestinian people have been the victims of one of the greatest injustices in the history of the world. Their condition is now worse than it was when that young man came to my door in 1975, in the summer of 1975. There's now 13 million Palestinians. Most of them are refugees, exiles, scattered around the world, maybe some of them even here. The ones who live in Jerusalem can no longer even claim that they live in Palestine. It has been annexed illegally, but so far as Israel is concerned, permanently. A fact now recognized by Barack Hussein Obama, the first American president to accept that Jerusalem is an Israeli city. But those who are not living under annexation are living in the West Bank under siege, unless they're outside as refugees. Their land is being paved with illegal settlements. And here I want to make this point. Don't imagine settlements are little clusters of log cabins, tents, the pioneer spirit. By settlement, I mean cities, gleaming, golden cities, with sprinklers and swimming pools and luxury apartments and beautiful roads and gardens. That's what an Israeli settlement is. And it's being built, has been built on stolen land, the owners of which are almost certainly living as refugees and exiles. The settlements spread, the military roads proliferate, only Jews may drive on them, checkpoints are everywhere, a daily, sometimes hourly humiliation for the Palestinian people trying to pass through them. Women give birth at these checkpoints. People die at these checkpoints trying to get to medical assistance on the other side of them. Checkpoints between someone's house and their fields so that they can't pick their crops except by queuing for hours and enduring the capricious power of the foreign soldiers manning that checkpoint. Or if they're particularly unlucky, they will live under siege in Gaza, where for now 5 years a total siege has been laid upon them. A medieval siege where every entry and exit for almost 2 million people is controlled by these foreign soldiers who will let nothing out and no one out, and let virtually nothing in and virtually no one in. There is one gate that's controlled by Egypt, about which I must now take a few minutes to speak. Some of you may know I was the leader of several convoys which broke the siege of Gaza, leaving from this country and picking up vehicles and people and aid from many other countries, and arriving en masse with hundreds of vehicles, having to force our way through the obstacles created by the former Egyptian dictator Hosni Mubarak. After one of these, I was deported from Egypt and declared persona non grata. I was told by a little functionary at the airport that I would never enter Egypt again. I told him never is a long time. Let's see about that. A year later, Mubarak was overthrown and I was back in Egypt. But I'm banned again. And even in that interregnum, let me put it this way, Mubarak was bad, but not as bad as the military junta ruling Egypt today. And Morsi was better, but not much. And here again, I say to our brothers in the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan around the world, I totally oppose the overthrow of the president in Egypt. I totally oppose his being thrown into prison and being placed on trial by military officers bought and paid for in the United States of America. But you have to ask yourselves how and why you made such a mess of the 1 year you were in power in Egypt. What mistakes you made in that 1 year that made it so easy for this coup to succeed. And there are many, many aspects to that which we don't have time to go into, except in this one regard. Morsi was not as bad as Mubarak and definitely not as bad as the junta, but he didn't do much for the Palestinians in Gaza because he wanted to please, or at least not anger, his neighbor in what they call Israel and the United States of America, that he thought he could palliate to the extent that they would consider allowing him to remain in power. These mistakes have to be properly studied by all who consider themselves part of the Muslim Brotherhood, or those mistakes will either be repeated when they come to power, wherever they come to power again, or may indeed stop them ever coming to power anywhere else again. But the people in Gaza now are literally starving to death. That's why, thanks to Support Our Cause, we're organizing this collection tonight for Interpal. We have a duty to give to Interpal, which I can guarantee you, I don't have the same politics as them, neither do you, but they are clean and honest people. And Interpal will make sure that anything you give finishes up on the table, in the schoolroom, in the doctors, in the hospitals, in Gaza, under siege. I don't know what to say more about Gaza than you've heard me say 100 times before. Nearly 2 million people locked up in a concentration camp, with the world turning its face away, being literally starved to death, to punish them for how they voted in a democratic election. When you hear William Hague and David Cameron and Western politicians talking about the need to respect democracy, remember this. They mean democracy where you vote for the candidates they want you to vote for. They mean democracy where you choose leaders who will serve them rather than you. And if you, well, let's digress across the border into Lebanon. I once had a big debate, you can see it on YouTube, with the then Foreign Secretary Margaret Beckett, who was talking about democracy in Lebanon. I told her there is no democracy in Lebanon. If there was democracy in Lebanon, Syed Hassan Nasrallah would be the president of Lebanon by a country mile. He would win the election by hundreds of thousands, millions of votes. But he can't. He's not allowed to be the president of Lebanon because of a sectarian constitution based on a census now more than 50 years old. So I could go on. I just want to make 3 points in conclusion, then it's your turn. These 3 points are this. We have to win the argument first amongst the Ummah that Palestine is the heart of the matter, is the most sacred of the challenges that we face. And the effort and energy and hatred and blood and treasure going into other struggles is a sin against the people of Palestine and the sacred cause of Palestine. If the liberation of Palestine is not achieved, none of us has any business to be fighting with each other, still less killing each other, whilst Al-Aqsa is in chains. Secondly, as British people, we have to win the argument amongst the wider British community that Israel is just as unacceptable a state as apartheid South Africa was in its day. For the older amongst you, you will remember the days when no self-respecting person could possibly openly deal with apartheid South Africa. They couldn't buy South African goods. They couldn't say, I'm off to Cape Town for my holidays, or I'm going to give a lecture in the white-only University of the Witwatersrand. They couldn't do other than pay lip service, at least, to the cause of majority rule in South Africa. We have not yet got that kind of critical mass around the issue of Palestine in this country. So much so, there are Muslim shopkeepers selling Israeli products. Don't tell me it doesn't happen, because every year in Ramadan, I go around these shops and ask the shopkeeper how we can justify selling to the faithful in Ramadan dates with which we break our fast that have the blood of Palestinian children on them. And if we have Muslim shopkeepers selling Israeli products, what about the rest? And my last point echoes a point that I made earlier. I don't care for this sectarian nonsense. Indeed, I scarcely understand it. All I know is this, and I say it to those who will see this from the Sunni majority population here and abroad. You tell me that Shiites are not Muslims, but the Shiites are fighting for Palestine better than you. You tell me that Iran is some kind of devil, but Iran is fighting for the Palestinians better than any Arab country is fighting for them. I have had the privilege of living and working regularly every month amongst the people of the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, the only Arab army ever to defeat the Israeli armed forces in the battlefield. And if Israel wants to try again, they will be defeated again. So don't talk to me. Don't try to pull me away from Shiites. I'm not a Shiite, but I'm with the Shiites. I'm with any Muslim who acts like a Muslim, who carries out their obligations as a Muslim, and who sincerely believes in God and the Judgment Day, which all of us, including them, will face in the end. Wassalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.
Wow. We all gathered to hear what Mr. Galloway is expecting him to say. That's exactly what he's done. What we'll do now is we'll start with a question and answer session. I'll start with ladies first, and we'll alternate with gents. Is there a mic going around? Is there one of the ladies there? Yes. Do you have any questions? Should we start from the ladies? Any questions from the ladies?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm just asking this question on behalf of one of the sisters. The question is, what is the current situation of Masjid al-Aqsa?
The masjid is in a very endangered situation. In addition to the daily, and especially on Jummah, atrocities that are being committed by Israeli settlers and the soldiers and police who surround and besiege the mosque, it is being undermined by so-called archaeological digs, searching for the long-lost Jewish temple, which they say lies underneath the mosque. These digs endanger the very existence of the mosque. One day, la samahallah, you will wake up to learn that Al-Aqsa is no longer there, that it has collapsed. God forbid, but this is a very real possibility. And the irony is, the more they dig, the less they find. And more Israeli scholarship. One in particular, his name will come back to me in a moment. I interviewed him once on Press TV. He's written a magnificent book called The Myth of the Jewish People, in which he, as an Israeli Jew, establishes, at least to my satisfaction and to the hundreds of thousands who have bought the book, actually the Ashkenazi European Jews now ruling the roost in Palestine have never actually been there. They have no connection at all to the land of Palestine. Their ancestors converted to Judaism in Europe in 800 or 900. So the more they search, maybe there's divine justice in this, the more they search for the archaeological keys that would establish their rights to Palestine, the less they find, and the more of their academics who argue that whilst we might now have a case to live here because we were born here, actually our ancestors have no connection to this land at all. Meanwhile, those whose ancestors do, and who themselves do, are living in exile. So Al-Aqsa should be raised as an issue. Of course, the rotten Arab regimes cannot afford to highlight this issue, because all it will do is invite their people to say, well, what are you doing about it? Almost nothing could be more serious than the possibility of the Al-Aqsa collapsing. What are you doing about it? And the answer, of course, is they are doing nothing about it. They can do nothing about it, because they are belly dancing for the people who are doing it. And that's why nobody talks about Jerusalem. And it's why we must.
Okay, sorry, yeah, thanks. I wanted to ask you about the second part of the title of your talk tonight, which is about Syria. The situation for many people is quite confusing, because on the one hand you have Assad, who is Ba'athist dictator, and he has the blood of innocents on his hand. But on the other hand, there are all kinds of extremists and other terrorist groups trying to fight him. And this has polarized the Muslim communities throughout the world and led to extremism within the Shia and the Sunni communities. So the first question is, what is your analysis of what is happening there? And number two is, what can be done about combating the extremism that is being fed into the communities in the UK? Thank you.
Well, of course I'm well aware that this is a polarizing issue. If I was not me, or if I was looking for votes, I'd answer this question in a different way. But I am me, and I never look for votes. If you want to give me them, that's fine. But I don't go looking for them, and I certainly don't ask for them. I answer it this way. I'm not with Bashar, but I'm against his enemies. Who are his enemies? His enemies are first and foremost Israel. Syria is the only Arab country with absolutely no political or diplomatic relations with the Zionist state. Syria was the only country ready to be the base for the Palestinian resistance. Hamas were there, eating there for more than 20 years. I never ate anything from Syria. The Syrian regime never gave me one brass halfpenny, but they gave Hamas a lot. And that's because Syria allowed Hamas to be based there when no other Arab country would allow them to. Syria was the only Arab country assisting the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, inflict the only ever defeat on Israeli arms anywhere in the history of that state. And Syria refuses to break relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran, refuses to describe Iran as a snake, the head of a snake, and all the other insults that WikiLeaks revealed to us are the common currency of the discussions with American officials of the Arab rulers, kings, and presidents. So the reason they're trying to destroy Syria is not because of the bad things about Syria, which are many, but because of the good things. They want to destroy Bashar because of those good things. It could hardly be for the bad things, because all of our best friends do these bad things, and much more. You can't say that our best friend, which is what Prince Charles said on behalf of Britain just last week, when he was sword dancing with the Saudi kings. I'm not making this up, you can see the film. Done up like a Bedouin, doing a sword dance. He said Saudi Arabia is our best friend in the Arab world. So, you could hardly say Saudi Arabia is your best friend, but you're against bad things in Syria, because the bad things in Saudi Arabia, I assure you, are very much worse than they are in Syria. Women are not even allowed to drive motor cars in Saudi Arabia, or step out in public without a male relative with them. People are routinely executed and mutilated in barbaric punishment, but only if they're Pakistani, Bengali, Indian, Nepalese, Indonesian, Thai, and sometimes for doing nothing at all. There is no freedom of any kind in Saudi Arabia. No person would be permitted to gather as you have, to hear anyone speak their mind in Saudi Arabia. There is no liberty or freedom of any kind there. So Western countries who describe Saudi Arabia as their best friend are not in any position to talk about human rights and democracy in Syria. But I have, as it happens, always backed human rights and democracy in Syria. For many years, decades, I never set foot in Syria. And I would not have been welcome if I had. So I'm for political transition to democracy in Syria, but not the kind of democracy that Britain, America, and Israel have in mind, which would do the reverse of all the good things that Bashar does that I have just described. And lastly, a revolution in Syria carried out by the kind of people who cut off that young man's head in Woolwich, in South London, in broad daylight, in front of hundreds of women and children, whose trial has just ended, is not a revolution that I want to be associated with. I have seen them eating human hearts that they cut from the chests of those they had killed. I have seen them. I see them because they film themselves thinking that it's a good look, cutting off the heads of people for no other reason than that they have a different religion, or even a different part of that religion, or even in their part of the religion, but not quite as extremely as them. I've seen them destroying Christian holy places. I've seen them kidnapping nuns, murdering priests, killing even bishops. I've seen the film of them cutting the head with a bread knife of a Roman Catholic bishop on his knees in front of them, because they helpfully put it on YouTube for us. So, if that's your revolution, I don't want any part of it. Because I know the Syrian people well. I know them well because they are the same as the Lebanese people and the same as the Palestinian people. All of this territory was once one land, Bilad al-Sham. And I know that they don't want to live like that. They don't want to live the Al-Qaeda life. And I will not be a party to forcing them to do so. Britain, on the other hand, is now caught on the horns of a dilemma. It has supported Al-Qaeda with guns and money, effectively encouraged so-called jihadists to go there to learn the tools and trades of war, and now they're terrified that these people have started to come back. And I'm terrified that they've started to come back, because I know what they will try to do when they do come back. And I said to William Hague, going into the lift the other day, I said, I have known you all your life, and all your life you've been wrong. But now you're insane. Your policy in Syria is insanity. You have built a Frankenstein monster, and now you're worried about what the monster is going to do. It's called a monster for a reason. Two reasons. One, you can't control it once you've built it. And two, because it's a monster, it can do rather a lot of damage. He didn't answer me, by the way. He just went, blah, 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 blah. So, what's going to happen? These Takfiris have lost. The Syrian people have won. The vast majority, this is a very important point, the vast majority of soldiers in the Syrian army are Sunni Muslims. Bashar's wife is a Sunni. His father-in-law is a Sunni. Many of the regime are Sunni. Most of the social base of the government now, even if they hated the government before, is Sunni. Because they don't want Al-Qaeda. We have a saying in English, cling on to nurse for fear of something worse. And that is the mind of the great majority of Syrian people now. So the war is lost, but the Syrian state cannot clear its territory of these people. It has support, to be sure, from Hezbollah, from Iran, from Russia, from China, but there's a lot of these people. There's more than 100,000 of these fanatics in Syria. That's a lot of people. And Saudi Arabia and others have given them billions of dollars. They have weapons to carry on fighting for many years. And they will. So the blood, I'm afraid, will continue to flow in Syria for many years to come. But the government in Damascus will not fall. And the victory of Al-Qaeda will never happen.
What do we do about extremism?
Okay, let me come back to you afterwards.
Yeah.
Let's get we'll come back to you. Is there a question from ladies? You got a mic with you there.
Respected Mr. Galloway, most of the question has been answered. My question was all about this global terrorism. Terrorism especially involving Pakistan and India. So my question was, as you clearly declared, you are not in favor of Saudi Arabia. So have you ever spoken to the royals yourself, that why they are doing? Is there any end to terrorism in the world? Because it's not affecting royals or anyone else in the world. It's just affecting the common public. So why the Muslim world, all over the world, is it disintegrating? So, and what we can do to save our future generations? Thank you.
Well, if I went to Saudi Arabia, sister, you would never see me again. And if I spoke to the King of Saudi Arabia like I spoke to William Hague, I'd have my head in my hands. So no, I haven't. I have met the King of Saudi Arabia twice before he was the King. But we weren't talking about these matters. It was many years ago. I'm not surprised that the regime in Saudi Arabia does what it does. I'm surprised at the number of people who fall for it. If I was a multi-trillionaire, 29-stone Saudi king with a harem of hundreds and my own casinos and all the other sins that these people commit, I would act the same way as them. What I don't know is why a poor Muslim in Bradford would fall for it. Or a poor Muslim in South London would fall for it. I don't understand what's in it for them. They have none of these things. They inject this sectarian poison, which, as you say, explodes in Quetta and in Islamabad and in the northwest frontier and in Afghanistan and in the Caucasus and many, many other places. They inject this for a reason. It's a weapon for them. Bandar Bush, as George Bush called him, who was so close to the Bush family that they called him Bandar Bush, now then the Saudi ambassador to the US, now without position, minister without portfolio, but a very, very important guy in the Saudi state. He met President Putin about 6 months ago in the run-up to the Sochi Winter Olympic Games. He told Putin, he was picking on the wrong man, that's for sure. He told Putin, you have the Olympic Games coming up, we can make sure that they are trouble-free. We can make sure that these Chechens and all these other organizations that we're supporting, we can make sure that they don't turn up with backpacks at your Olympic Games. But the price is you have to abandon Bashar and Syria. Well, you probably have guessed what kind of a man Putin is. He's certainly much more of a man than Bandar Bush. And Bandar was lucky that he got out alive. But President Putin told him, don't dare come to my country and threaten me. And he sent him away with a flea in his ear. And Russia is paying a price now for its stand on Syria and other matters. So we have to concentrate not on trying to affect the actions of these kings. You know, there's a fable, Aesop, who was a slave and a very wise philosopher. He tells the fable of the scorpion and the dog. The dog and the scorpion are standing on one side of a raging river, and the scorpion asks the dog, well, can I sit on your back and we swim across the river together? And the dog says, you'll sting me. And the scorpion says, of course not, I want to get to the other side of the river, I'll just sit on your back. So the dog, against his better judgment, takes the scorpion on his back, swims across the river, and feels the deadly poisonous sting going into his back. And looks at the scorpion and says, why did you do that? And the scorpion answers, because I'm a scorpion. Kings behave as they do because they're kings. We can't influence them. But we can influence those that they are influencing. We have to win those who are acting in their cause and being misled and used by them. And that's what I try to do.
Assalamu alaikum. George, nice to see you back after a long time. George, I got two questions putting into one single question. Now, either the occupation is in reality if people are there, or occupation by power. Don't you think the whole Muslim country is occupied by the West or by the superpower to do their dirty job? Because until and unless the Muslims don't get together and hold hands and fight for the Palestinians, I don't think I can see anything happening there, because everybody who is in that country is governed by the American power. Secondly, because they are giving the handouts, like in Pakistan, they give such a big amount of money, and they have corrupted those politicians, because the politicians are getting the aid without doing any work, and they are siphoning that money away from the country. So the country itself is so poor people cannot even be educated or cannot stand because they are busy fighting for survival. And thirdly, slavery. I think, again, the West plays a very big part on it, or the richer country plays very part on it. Before the slaves were being taken away. Now the slaves are being left into their country, but produce the goods for the masters at whatever the price they want. I don't know whether you would agree with me. Thank you so much.
There was a great Jamaican hero, Bob Marley. He wrote many fantastic songs, the best of which is a song called Redemption Song, which is a song about slavery. And in that song he says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but yourself can free your mind. This is the key, isn't it? Because you're right, the West doesn't have the power anymore to go to countries, physically occupy them, take hundreds of thousands of slaves in boat. They don't have that power. So they developed what they call soft power, which is a means by which you enslave yourself. You believe yourself to be inferior, yourself to be incapable, themselves to be superior to you, and with some kind of right to rule over you and to exploit you. And what Bob Marley was saying is that none but yourself, in other words, only yourself, can free yourself from that mental slavery. Now, Marley was not, on the whole, addressing Muslims, although I could tell from some of the younger brothers that they like Bob Marley. Maybe they shouldn't, but they do. The audience that Marley was addressing had some excuse. But what excuse does a Muslim have? It is forbidden to a Muslim to be a mental slave. Literally forbidden. It is an obligation on a Muslim, if he can, to raise his hand against injustice. If he cannot raise his hand, to raise his voice against injustice. And if he can do neither, then to curse that injustice in his heart. This is an obligation. So how people who pray and fast and make Hajj and tell the world how Muslim they are can disobey this fundamental obligation is very difficult to understand. The Jamaicans had an excuse. They had no Islam, most of them. And Marley was telling them what they had to do. But who needs to tell the Muslims that? What need should there be to tell the Muslims that? None at all. Let me go from Bob Marley to Chairman Mao. Once, the late President Arafat, who was a very dear friend of mine, asked me when I was a young man in my 20s, do you want to go to China? I was very, very excited. Do I want to go to China? This is in 1979 or 80. We flew all the way to China, had a meeting in the airport, and flew all the way back. I never saw China. I saw the airport. And we met the Chinese leaders. And one of them said, one of the main leaders of China at that time, he said to Arafat, the Arabs are not serious about liberating Palestine. There's 200 at that time, now 350. There's 250 million of you. There's 3 million of them, as there was at that time. You can all walk into Palestine and take it back. Walk in. What are they going to do? How many of you can they kill? you'd be pulling their heads off before they'd killed 5,000 of them. But you're not serious, he said. Arafat attempted a very long answer, but it wasn't really an answer. Because there isn't really an answer to that point. Now the numbers have changed a little, and weaponry and technology and so on is different now. But it was definitely true then. Now Israel is maybe 8 million with the Russian immigration and so on. Now the Arabs are 350 million and the Muslims are 1.7 billion. How is it possible for 1.7 billion people to be defeated by 7 million? Now don't tell me because the Jews have got money. The Muslims have got far more money than the Jews. Let's just take Britain. There's 200,000 Jews in Britain. At least 50,000 of them are on our side. So that's 150,000 Jewish supporters of Israel in Britain. There's 2 million Muslims in Britain. The Muslims in Britain are much richer than the Jews in Britain. So how come the Zionist lobby is so much more powerful than us? Are they better than us? Well, they work better. That's true. They hate each other more than Muslims hate each other, by the way. They're more divided. But they're united on one thing: to defend Israel. They'll do anything to defend Israel and unite with anybody to defend Israel. But the Muslims are not trying. Frankly, they're not trying. I spoke to an Arab prince, I shouldn't name him, when the Daily Express, the Sunday Express, and the Daily Star were on sale for £100 million. I said to him, look, these papers, especially the Daily Express, these papers are historic parts of the British establishment. They are pillars of the society, famous, hundreds of years old. For £100 million you could buy the 3 newspapers. It's not even charity. They make money. Why don't you buy them? He said they, this mysterious they, would never allow us. I said, you don't need permission from anybody. It's on sale. The first guy who writes a check for £1 million takes the papers. There's no parliamentary approval or royal approval or anything like that. It's a simple transaction. Give them the money, you've got the papers. No, they would never allow it. Richard Desmond, the Zionist pornographer, bought all 3 papers for £100 million. In fact, he paid less. Out of which he's now built, I think it's Hello magazine, Channel 5 television, lots of other dirty things that he does. He's a multi-billionaire with the power to make huge donations to political parties, which he does, all of them. Because he could see the value. And these papers are the most anti-Muslim newspapers in the land, especially the Daily Star and the Daily Express. And we could have owned them. You probably know Muslims. I know Muslims who've got 100 million, or could have asked their bank to advance some and bought those papers. But we didn't do it. And we complain about the others who do it. And we complain when we are the victims.
Assalamualaikum. I would like to ask you a question, if you don't mind asking. I would like to ask you, why do you think that the Sunnis don't support Palestine?
Oh no, the vast majority of Sunnis do support Palestine. But the Sunni rulers are openly collaborating with Israel. And the Sunni fanatics, the extremists, are effectively working in alliance with Israel. But the ordinary Sunni in Britain and around the world, his heart is with Palestine just like yours. But sometimes he's misled by the rulers and by the sectarians into believing that differences within the Muslim community are more important than our differences with Israel and the occupation of Palestine. Ayatollah Khomeini put it a good way. While we are fighting over whether our hands should be here or here, they are planning to cut off all of our arms. That was a very brilliant metaphor for the situation that we have.
I'd like to know what's the role of UN, who have passed so many resolutions against Israel. Are they defunct or what?
It's more or less defunct. It's never been up to much, but since the end of the Cold War, it doesn't really have a great deal of purpose. America has vetoed, I forget the exact number, but it's in the 70s, something like 73, Security Council resolutions concerning Palestine in the last 20 years. I don't know how many before that. When there was a massacre in Jenin, in I think 2002, it was one of the most horrific massacres in the camp there. I arrived in the camp the first day that it was possible after the massacre to see it. The Security Council met unusually on a Saturday night. It met through the night and it passed a resolution. America did not veto it. It passed a resolution that the Security Council must send a delegation to check the reports of massacre in the Jenin refugee camp. And Israel declared there will be no United Nations delegation coming here. And the Security Council accepted it. Totally defied the Security Council, even the United States, and nothing happened. So, you know, you can hardly blame Israel if it doesn't pay any price for the crimes that it commits. Why should it stop committing them? And I don't think there's any prospect of the United Nations delivering anything, neither in Palestine nor anywhere else in the world, because we saw in Yugoslavia and we saw in Iraq that if the Security Council declines to endorse any action by the United States just does it anyway. They couldn't get a resolution to attack Yugoslavia or to attack Iraq, but they attacked them both. They just did what they pleased. And so all this window dressing about the United Nations and so on is just so much propaganda. It's far better to resolve matters bilaterally, and that's what's happening, for example, with Iran now. Iran is talking directly to the United States, sometimes publicly, sometimes secretly. The Syrian question will not be resolved in Geneva. It will be resolved in direct negotiation between the parties. And by parties, I mean including Iran and Russia and so on. The United Nations is more and more meaningless. It's a useful propaganda. I'm not suggesting we don't engage there. I'm not suggesting we don't use it to showcase where we stand on things, but it will not be the means of resolving major issues. I don't know if you're from Pakistan, Kashmir, for example, has had an extant Security Council resolution demanding a plebiscite in occupied Kashmir, just putting an X on a piece of paper, since 1956. And it's now 2014, and it's never been held. And 100,000 people have been killed in the Intifada there in the last 20 years. And the Security Council doesn't even discuss it.
Yes, any other ladies? We got a mic there?
Syrian problem is going to go on for a long time, like Palestine. Is this problem created to make the state of Israel safe forever? And also, at the moment there are 2 million Syrian refugees, and they're going to be, by the end of the year, they're going to be 4 million refugees. So what should the international world should do for the refugees? There's not enough help going for them.
Well, if those who have put billions of dollars into destroying Syria really care anything about the Syrian people, why would these people be refugees? The Syrian refugee camps in Jordan and in Lebanon are hell on earth, especially during this long, wet, bitter winter. Hell on earth. Unspeakable things are happening there, especially to women and girls. If these people, who are the richest people on the earth, who are giving the weapons and the money to Al-Qaeda to destroy Syria, really cared about Syrians, these refugee camps would not be there. All these refugees would be living in their countries. But they give next to nothing to these refugees. Now, some people raised the demand, Labour raised the demand in Parliament that we should bring in 100 or 200 Syrian refugees. This is just window dressing. It's just putting lipstick on an ugly face. The solution is to return the refugees to their homes. And there's no reason why that can't happen. Because the same people making propaganda about the refugees are the people who are destroying the country and forcing people to run away in the first place. So I don't get myself involved in this question. The Syrian refugees are refugees because Saudi Arabia and Qatar and these other filthy rich countries are paying for the destruction of Syria. So they should pay for the refugees. That's my view.
Assalamu alaikum, Mr. Galloway, and respected scholar and Mu'mineen. Assalamu alaikum. Mr. Galloway, I'm envious of your intellectual suppleness and your moral high ground. You have an insatiable appetite for doing the right thing, and you're immeasurably talented. This, coupled with your oratorical disposition, allows you to make arguments precisely, very cogently, laced with unstoppable and resounding logic. And you remind me of a man who unites the passions of a fathomless coquetry, of a man of style, substance, righteousness, and free spirit. It is as if Charles Lindbergh is taking to flight again. Now, given the fact that you champion the rights of the usurped and all the inalienable rights you challenge and you for those that are oppressed, given all that, the establishment reveres you as a maverick. And I'm a bit concerned because I feel that had you been a mainstream politician, had you been within the mainstream lobby, you would have been more effective, I think, in championing these rights. Also, I want to make a point that I would like to ask you, what is the denouement of George Galloway? What is your epoch and your cause célèbre? What do you see yourself as achieving what you sought to achieve and no more? Thank you.
MashaAllah. Thank you very much for your very kind and complimentary words. I am honored by them, especially in the presence of my wife and the baby that's coming very soon, inshallah. I'm touched by what you say. However, although there was no but in your question, there was a but implied. First of all, if I was a mainstream politician, like all the others, you'd hate me. You wouldn't say these things about me because I wouldn't be sincere. As Tony Blair once said, once you can fake the sincerity, all the rest is easy. He said that. It was actually a quote from Bob Monkhouse, the lousy fifth-rate British comedian. But Blair said it, and he believed it. And if I were like them, you'd hate me. The only reason you like me is because of what I'm saying. Not because of how I say it. If I was saying unpalatable things in a polished way, that would just be lipstick on a pig. The pig would still be a pig. You like me because you like what I'm saying. And it's because of what I'm saying that I'm not in Downing Street. And I wouldn't want to be in Downing Street if I had to say the opposite of what I actually believe. So, it's not my choice. Although maverick, by the way, if you look it up in the dictionary, although it's used by the media against me as a bad thing, the definition of a maverick is an unbranded steer, an unbranded head of cattle, i.e. a head of cattle that belongs to nobody. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. I'd rather be a raging bull out of their control than have their brand on my back. In that sense, I'd rather be a maverick. But I don't like the term maverick because it implies, in the popular use of it, unpredictability, instability, that kind of thing. But anyone, and luckily, I've been in public life a long time, so the public record exists, going back almost 30 years in my case. You can read everything I've ever said in Parliament. Thanks to YouTube, you can watch everything I've ever said on television or said on radio, said at public speeches and so on. And if you could bear that, you would discover that there's nothing unpredictable about me at all. I'm saying exactly the same now as I've always said, and I say the same thing, whoever is the audience. Whether you're the audience, or if this was a Sunni mosque, or if this was a Christian church, or the BBC, or the US Senate, or anywhere else, I would say the same things. Because in the end, I believe in the judgment day. I believe that on the last day, I will be asked what I did. God gave me some gifts, no doubt. But I'll be asked what I did with them. Not what you did, or what anybody else did, but what I did with them. Because it's me that's being judged, as we all individually will be judged. So, because that's what I believe, everything I do with that in mind. I've made mistakes, I've committed sins, I've tried to atone for them, I've tried to live the life that I believe God wants us to live. And I'm hoping that on that last day, that I will be able to pass muster in the only election that matters to me. I said earlier, I'm not looking for votes. I'm only in Parliament by chance. I was very happy in 2010 to leave the British Parliament. That's before I discovered they were all thieves, fiddling their expenses, and doing all the things that we now know that they have been doing. But a by-election happened in Bradford, and I knew that we had a lot of support in Bradford. So against the advice of everybody, with the exception of my wife, I should say, but all my friends told me, don't be stupid. You don't even know the names of the streets in Bradford. The election is 20 days from now. I said, no, I'm standing. Alhamdulillah, I won a landslide majority. It was the most sensational political result in 100 years in British politics. But I have no particular wish to remain in Parliament. And I never ask anybody for their vote, ever. And I never have. I say, this is what I stand for. This is what I've done. This is what I'll do. The rest is your decision. Now, I might stand for Mayor of London in 2016. Because if God gives me strength, I'll still be young enough to do that. Ken Livingstone, my friend, has retired and will not run again. Boris Johnson is an idiot who must be defeated, but who may in any case have left the job and gone back into Parliament to challenge David Cameron for the leadership of the Conservative Party. So in 2016 you might have a London mayoral election with no Boris and no Ken. And Labour's candidate is quite likely to be a woman who said that she would throw herself under a bus for Tony Blair. Dame, what's her name again? Dame Tessa Jowell, who supported the wars and the war on terror and all the other crimes. Well, if she's the Labour candidate, I might well stand against her. And I think I'd have a good chance to defeat her. And if I defeated her, I could win the mayor because it's a transferable vote. You vote 1, 2, 3 according to your order of preference. So most Labour people, even if they were not going to vote for me, they would probably vote for me as number 2. And if I came ahead of the Labour candidate, all these number 2s would transfer to me. I haven't decided that yet. I might not. As I said, I have another baby on the way. Inshallah, I'll be still doing all the other things I do on television and radio. I'm starting a radio station. I don't know if I should say in the mosque. It's called Molotov Radio. It's a Molotov in the face of the tanks and the big power. The Molotov is the weapon of the poor in the street. The walls didn't fall down when I said that. That's the first market test of the title. I'm going to launch that this year. I'm making a film called The Killing of Tony Blair, which doesn't involve me killing Tony Blair, but that would be quite a popular film, but deals with the killings of Tony Blair, the killing of the Labour Party that he did, the killing of the people in the wars, and the financial killing that he's making out of both. So I have many projects. So the denouement, I don't know. None of us know what lies ahead of us. Only God knows that. But as long as God gives me breath, I'll continue doing things like this. Thank you very much.
We have about 10 more minutes. I'll take a question from the ladies. I've got a couple of questions here, and I'll take one from there. I think that'll be probably the case. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to thank you very much for, it's wonderful to hear your support for the Palestinians. I have Palestine carved on my heart too. I go there and I come back and give talks trying to be a voice for voiceless people. And I'm always shocked by the fact, apart from when I came here to this wonderful place, people always say at the end, but we didn't know. And what is it about our media that no voice of the Palestinians is ever heard?
Well, thank you, Madame, and thank you for coming. The good news is we no longer need that media. The guy that didn't pay the 100 million for the Daily Express probably made a good business decision, because newspapers are fast now going out of business. The mainstream television companies are losing audience like snow off the proverbial dike. The proliferation of mass media. Now, I have a weekly show on Russia Today, which goes out on the Sky platform 512. On Saturdays, it goes out 5 times, from Fajr right up to 10:30 in the evening. It has a mass audience. Press TV, I have a program every Thursday called Comment, a phone-in show, which, despite Ofcom taking Press TV off the Sky platform, still has a massive audience all over the world. I'm starting this radio station. I have, I don't know how many thousands. It's tens, maybe scores of thousands of videos on YouTube. I can't remember the last time I looked, but something like 100 million people have watched my videos on YouTube. Anybody that wants to hear anything about these issues that I've got to say can easily do it now. They don't need the permission of Sky or the BBC. I haven't been on the BBC. I burst onto the BBC when Thatcher died a year ago. And I don't think I've been on BBC News since. Maybe they didn't like what I said. I get on Question Time from time to time, but that's not made by the BBC. That's made by David Dimbleby, who seems to like me. But if it was up to the BBC, I'd never be on Question Time. So the point I'm making is, don't worry about the media. We have to make our own media. And we are now making our own media. And there's TV stations, radio stations, by the 100, coming up, rising up. And very soon, within maybe 5 years, definitely 10, all television will be internet television. There will be no satellites. You will not need to be a country or a billionaire to have a TV station. Anybody that's got a curry shop could have a TV station, and probably will. Now, more isn't necessarily better, but it definitely gives us more opportunity to get the truth out there. I have been in politics, as I said, for now 45 years. And there has never been a time when more people knew more about the truth than there is in Britain today. So don't despair, madam. Don't despair.
I've got a timely question here. Somebody wants to know as to what can be done to get Press TV back on UK channel.
Well, you should keep asking for it to be brought back. You should ask your MP to press the government on that. Press TV was taken off for entirely bogus political reasons. We did nothing wrong at all. I was one of those who represented Press TV at Ofcom in the hearings. The Ofcom people were not even listening to our arguments because their decision had already been made. And we know that because of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, because they leaked conversations with British embassy officials and American officials overseas, saying that Britain was about to do something to shut down Press TV. And it was all about the sanctions and hostility against Iran. But the Western policy towards Iran is beginning to change now. So the attitude to the sanctions will change, and the attitude to Press TV will change. And I fully expect, if not this year, then definitely next, Press TV will be back on Sky.
We have time for one more question. Abbas? Yeah. Where are you?
Slightly off topic, a great speech by the way, about the situation in Ukraine which is currently developing, because it seems that it's quite a dangerous scenario and it could get out of hand rather quickly if things are not controlled. And also, I feel it's a worrying precedent because you have democratically elected leaders who are basically being taken out by violent mobs. I think we've seen what happened in Egypt. I think Venezuela is also on the radio as well. And also, I think were Russia to get involved in a wider conflict, could potentially open up another front for Syria, which they're looking for anyway. So can you please elaborate on some of these points?
Well, I'm glad that you can see that so clearly. I think that, that Russia has every right to take the steps that they have taken. There is no government in Ukraine. The government has been overthrown by a mob. It was a democratically elected government. A mob overthrew it. The president has fled for his life. So there is no power in Ukraine. There's only street power, and what a street power it is. It is the most rabidly anti-Semitic, fascist, right-wing mob ever assembled in post-war Europe. And yet, mainstream Western politicians are going along with it. They go along with Al-Qaeda in Syria, and they go along with Nazis in the Ukraine. They'll ally with anyone who's ready to destroy that which they wish to be destroyed, which in this case is Russia's new power. You see, Russia, when it was run by Yeltsin, a drunken fool who gave all of Russia's wealth away, and Chelsea Football Club is a good example, they loved Russia. They loved Yeltsin. They could have a good laugh at him. But nobody's laughing at Putin. Since Putin came, elected to power, Russia has become strong again, begun to recover its dignity, and not giving away its wealth to foreigners, and not allowing people to push it around. And so the West took a big gamble in Ukraine, and Russia has to respond to it. Now, the Crimea was Russian until 1954. It was given away by Khrushchev to Ukraine, but that didn't matter because both Russia and Ukraine, thank you, Lord, were members of the Soviet Union. If there was to be no Soviet Union, Russia would never have given Crimea away to Ukraine. The Russian military fleet, naval fleet, the Black Sea Fleet, is there based in Sebastopol, in Crimea, and the mobs have demanded that Russia, even though it has it by treaty for another nearly 50 years, have demanded that the Russian fleet be cleared out of Sebastopol, which would mean the Russians would have no access to the Black Sea, therefore no access to the Mediterranean, therefore no access to Syria, and so on. Russia cannot possibly accept this. Moreover, 60% of the population of Crimea are Russians. I'm not talking about just Russian speakers. They are ethnic Russians. So Russia has a responsibility to protect them. 45% of the people of the Ukraine are Russian speakers. And all of the eastern part of the country is totally against the mob that's taken power in Kiev. So Russia has an obligation to defend its compatriots and its military and economic interests in the country. The pipeline, for example, for Russian gas, Gazprom, which is sponsoring the Champions League at the moment. You see them on TV every Wednesday. This pipeline goes across Ukraine. It belongs to Russia. Russia paid for it. So it has legitimate economic and military interests in the country and duties to its compatriots and to its ethnic Russian citizens. But I don't think it will get out of hand. Putin is not any kind of madman. I don't think that Russia is going to invade Ukraine as a whole, unless things take a very much turn for the worse. I think Russia is showing its strength, showing that it has responsibilities and it's ready to exercise them. But the one thing I cannot take is John Kerry and John McCain and David Cameron, who've invaded and occupied country after country after country, lecturing the Russians about the unacceptability of military conduct of this type. You really couldn't make that up. But that's what we're having to listen to now on the media. So, I take my hat off to President Putin. I think he's done a magnificent job for Russia and for the world. And I'm running out of gas now.
Thank you very much. I think this comes to the end of, you sort of ran out at the right time. And I will ask Sheikh Jaffer Ladak, our esteemed resident alim, to speak for a few minutes. Sheikh.
Let's begin firstly by showing our appreciation to George with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين awaited Savior of mankind, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. Respected brothers and sisters, Salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the community, the managing committee, and all the organizers for ensuring such a phenomenal event takes place. This kind of platform, this kind of discussion, the level of intellectual acumen being brought forth here needs to be a staple diet of our communities. And therefore more programs like this need to ensure that they happen so that we can mold our communities in accordance with the most positive and befitting mindset. On that basis, I would like to extend on several occasions forthcoming welcomes to George and others who he feels that he should recommend for our community to welcome, in the hope that everyone from the youth to the elder partakes in these wonderful set programs. I would also like to thank George for taking time out of what I'm sure is a massively busy schedule, and I'm sure everybody here has benefited. I'm sure there will be a mass rush to come and thank him, but in case there is anyone here who will not make it to you, then of course I thank you on behalf of them, and we pray for the success of you, your wife, and also that the forthcoming child is a revolutionary, a servant of God, and someone who also partakes in bringing about the awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farjuhu sharif. I would like to discuss for a few minutes the aspirations of Islam and align them with what George has said to us. If you think about the philosophy of religion, if you think about the utmost purpose of creation, what would those things be? Imagine now the Prophet was sitting here and we were to ask him, in terms of what you aspired Islam to be, not at its conception, 1400 years in, what would you hope from us? What is the utmost peak of what any religion should be achieving? You can imagine that the Prophet would say something along the lines of religion, irrespective of its name or sect, the religion itself should be ensuring that everyone in humanity has the best got out of them. So that I, as the Prophet, who sits in Medina and has Christians and Jews and Zoroastrians and hypocrites and true followers, I want to take them all from a state in which they are in towards a divine state of completion. From a state of weakness to a state of strength. From diversity towards unity of an utmost goal. This is what religion is seeking to achieve for us. Religion seeks to ensure the eradication of poverty, to remove illiteracy, to ensure someone who is homeless is actually blossoming into a human being that he is supposed to be. The Holy Quran speaks about these lofty aims. I've just picked out one or two verses in order to appreciate the lofty goals of Islam and then understand it in the granular sense of what we are speaking about. So for us to ponder over this evening, when you and I return back to the comforts of our house, and we're reflecting upon the embargo upon Gaza, and we imagine the turmoil that each and every one of our brothers and sisters are undertaking, refer to these following verses. Surah Taha, chapter number 20, verses 117 to 119. 20, 117 to 119. And God addressed Adam and Eve, Adam alayhi salam and Hawa salamullahi alayha, and said, do not let Iblis, Satan, drive you both from the garden. And then he clarifies why. Why should you not allow yourselves to be expelled from the garden? Pay close attention to God's conception of what humanity is supposed to be like. He says, so if you were to be expelled from the garden, you would live a life of unhappiness. Ensure that we have not, surely it is that we have ordained that mankind should not be in a state of hunger, nor bare of clothing. You should not be in a state of thirst, or where the sun beats down upon you. Look at what God is saying about humanity. We have created you for the utmost purpose to have your basic amenities. You should be fed, you should be clothed, you should be literate, you should have moral aspirations, not people who are homeless, without water, without clothes, and as such. When you realize these are the higher echelons of what God had expected from humanity, you begin to see the state of the world, you begin to see what is happening in the refugee camps in Syria, you begin to see what has been happening decade after decade in Palestine, and throughout the world, in fact, not just in these two places. There is a complete imbalance between what God had expected religion to do and what is taking place. Now here, from the Muslim tradition, we have so much that has been constantly imbibed into our hearts as to our responsibilities in line with what the aspirations of religion actually is. I'll just give you one or two glimpses, and I'll quote this with the Shia texts, because inshallah you and I are very familiar with those. Take, for example, just the month of Ramadan, the month in which we go hungry and thirsty for the sake of ensuring the spiritual development of our soul and a slight appreciation of what is taking place in the rest of the world. Every day, 5 times a day, after our prayers, there is a particular supplication we are recommended to recite. What is that? Allahumma adkhil ala ahlil, Allahumma aghni kulla, Allahumma ashbi' kulla. Have you ever noticed these words? Every day we recite them. Oh God, please feed the one who is in a state of abject hunger. Oh God, free the one who is wrongfully imprisoned. Oh God, look after the one who has he had to flee from the safety of his own house. Line after line after line do we beg and seek sustenance, betterment on behalf of those who are the downtrodden of the world. Millions of us, day after day after day, for 30 days in the month of Ramadan. And every time that dua, that supplication ascends to God, you can imagine what He's saying back to us. You want me to feed the hungry? Do you want me to ensure those people who are in the prisons wrongfully are freed? What are you doing to do those things? You're asking me, become my hand on this earth and do it yourself. You're begging me to cure you of cancer? How much have you put into curing cancer? You're asking me to free the people of this world. What have you done to free the people of this world? Now here, if you understand this balance of responsibility between the divine and the divinely created, you will also appreciate the ramifications of this in light of us as a sect and the level of responsibility on us as followers of the Thaqalain, the Quran and the Holy Ahl al-Bayt, peace and blessings be upon them all. Take, for example, the supplication of Dua Iftitah. Again, something we recite so often, just to remind ourselves in the month of Ramadan. Who can tell us, who is the author? Who is the author of Dua Iftitah? Who? Ahsantum. The awaited Savior of humanity. Muslim, Christian, Jew, we are all waiting for this one human Savior. Our eschatology speaks of ultimately one man and one individual to bring about justice around the world, just as there is injustice and poverty around the world. What does he say in Da'at al-Iftitah? Ponder over it and let us understand it in light of what George has said. What does the Imam say? Allahumma ma'arraftana min al-haqq fahammilna wa ma qasuna anhu faballighna Allahumma al-mun bihi sha'fana wa sha'ab bihi sad'ana. Look at the statement. Oh Allah, it's a supplication to God. Oh Allah, allow me to be aware of my own shortcomings and help me to overcome them. Deliver me upon those shortcomings. Do you know what the first line of your master, the Imam of our time, is after making that supplication? Make me aware of my shortcomings. Help me to overcome them. His first line, oh God, stitch together our separations. You know what George said? I noted it down. I noted down most of his speech. And there were 3 points to his conclusion. Number one, what we must do is win the argument within the Ummah that Palestine is the axis of our struggles. Number two, we must ensure that the British people are aware of the realities of what take place in Palestine, in Syria, in Egypt, in Yemen, in Bahrain, wherever there may be oppression, irrespective of religion, faith, color, or gender. And lastly, we must, and I'm quoting his words, and I fully agree with them, we must put aside sectarian nonsense. I will repeat it one more time in case anyone is unsure of the words. We must put aside sectarian nonsense. There was one person who said that we must stand hand in hand as Muslims. That was a beautiful way to elaborate on what George had said. Number one, win the argument within the Ummah. Number two, British people must explain to them and make them see the reality. Number three, put aside sectarian nonsense. I want to pose 1 or 2 points here, having understood the reality of what religion seeks to achieve, the level of expectation upon the followers of Ahl al-Bayt, salamullahi alayhim ajma'een. Number one, according to our ahadith, when the awaited Saviour of humanity comes, he starts his mission from where? Where is the place he commences? Where? Mecca, correct? Does anyone know the first place he heads to? According to our ahadith, the first place he heads to in order to commence his revolution on behalf of humanity? Israel. Israel. The first place. He establishes his government in Kufa, according to our narrations. But for where would he start his victory? You would start by cutting off the head of the snake, as George mentioned about the other side of what the media says. The first place he goes to is Israel. If it's so important in the eyes of Mahdi, salamullahi alayhi, how important should it be towards us? I want to just point out something. It's behind us on the other side. Maybe the brothers can see it towards the back. Maybe here you can't. It is a line from Da'a Ahad. Da'a Ahad is the supplication of the covenant that you make between you and the awaited Saviour every morning post-Fajr. Look at the line. Oh God, renew for him my covenant. Pledge and allegiance upon my neck in the morning of this day of mine and whatever days of my life I happen to live. If we make that covenant and his first goal is to arrive and free humanity from the cancer that is Zionism, where should my heart lie today in 2014 in light of that particular da'wah? If he was to walk in now, and just like Hussein ibn Ali alayhi salam said, I need people to rise with me, and he only managed to muster 72 people against the tyrant against Yazid. Imagine what Mahdi salamullahi alayhi will want, and where his first stop will be when he arrives on whichever blessed Friday it will be. Number one. Number two, we must ensure that the British people are aware. Here, I really want to open the mind and think about this. I think, if I'm not wrong, we've approached the 25-year anniversary of Hillsborough. Is that correct? Yes?
Yes.
Now, just in case, we don't know, but many lives, unfortunately, were lost in Hillsborough, purposelessly, and we mourn all of them. But for 25 years, the family members, football clubs have united in order to bring about justice. The reality is, when an injustice takes place around the world, humanity innately seeks to bring about a balance and redress the issue. They want justice. You can see it happening naturally. They are willing to talk, go on TV, put in their own funds, bring lawyers, write books, write songs. And this is an injustice. It's innate within us to want to free ourselves of injustice around the world. The problem is people don't know that this injustice has taken place in Palestine. You can see how hard people are working, for example, with the Hillsborough tragedy. But if you were to just open their mind and say, you are working tirelessly to bring justice to those who died in Hillsborough, let me point to you another injustice, how hard you're working on behalf of this family. Can you imagine how hard you should work on the greatest tragedy of the last century and this? We haven't even done the very basics of introducing the world to the realities that are taking place. The last thing that George had said to us is that we need to remove sectarian nonsense. Now here, this can be a sticky theological issue. However, for all of us, we should understand that we are human, Muslim, and thus our allegiance to the Ahlul Bayt and the sectarian name that we evoke requires us to bid for the higher goals of the religion and not the lower desire of the soul. I want my religion to be named. I want my sect to be, this and have this event to the exclusion of others. This greed, this lack of understanding needs to be removed from the groundwork, from our children, how we bring them up. We are responsible to humanity, and we have a responsibility to teach humanity about the realities of what are going on. If we cannot even stand hand in hand with our own Muslim brothers and sisters, how do you expect the rest of humanity to unite? The level of hypocrisy. We want to do interfaith dialogue. We won't even do intrafaith dialogue. The level of hypocrisy. We want others to fight on our behalf. We can't even get each other to fight on our behalf. The language that we use, the things that we evoke, need to be removed from our pulpits. It needs to be understood in the intellectual paradigm of the 21st century. I will conclude with these points on Palestine. His Eminence, Ayatollah al-Adama, Sayyid Ali Sistani, may Allah grant him a long life, and Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Husseini Khamenei, may Allah grant him a long life, have absolutely, unequivocally stated, anyone who purchases anything, an atom's weight, that goes towards the illegal and illegitimate state of Israel is performing the highest level of haram act that you could appreciate. It is absolutely haram to purchase anything that goes towards them. Unfortunately, within our houses, within even our mosques, we are purchasing and we are feeding our children with these things, and we don't even realize what we are doing. I will say that there is a verse of the Holy Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the polytheist girl who was killed unjustly at the time of ignorance. The verse says, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. On the day of judgment, the polytheistic child will have the right to ask God on the day of judgment, for what reason was I killed? I pose you a question. Will not the Palestinian child who is shot in the head with a bullet, whose house is bulldozed over, with the money that I put into them and supplicate and use to ensure that the bullet goes into their head through my own work, Do you not think the Palestinian Muslim child on the Day of Judgment will have a right over you and I to say, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ? For what reason was I killed? We need to awaken from where we are, this deep slumber, this passivity of where we are. Ponder upon why we are so passive as a community. Are we distinguishable from anyone else? We may come on a Thursday night to recite the Aqamail, Ziyarat Waritha. We may come on the day to commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Baqir alayhi salam. But in terms of the other dynamic aspects, are we any different to the rest of the world? We watch the same TV, we eat the same things, we live in the same comfort. When a new TV series comes, we bury our heads into it to ensure that we waste as much time. If we weren't to come on a Thursday night, for the vast majority of us, we would be indistinguishable from the average person walking down the street. That is not expected from us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran says, فَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ. Be upstanding as you have been commanded to be. Fulfill your obligations as you have been commanded. And so I pose to you a question to plant the seed. Many of us here will be doing many things on behalf of the Palestinians. Many of us will be doing many things on behalf of the Syrian refugees, and. If you are not, what will you be doing from tonight? What one thing in your heart will you change and commit to tonight in this place of sanctity and say to God, from yesterday I was passive, I was asleep, it made no difference in my life, but from tonight I testify and pledge, I pledge that I will do one thing. What is that one thing that you will take on from that? And if you're already doing one, what is the second thing that you can do from today? By God, one day Palestine will be free. By God, one day we will see justice around the world. And by God, we will see the day, God willing, when Mahdi salamullahi alayhi and his illuminated face will bring justice to the whole of humanity. Walhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi al-Tahirin. May I ask you to raise your hands, join each other in dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of the awaited Saviour, to allow us to be alongside Him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world before His coming, raise us from our graves so that we may partake in the victory of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times. People in a state of war, people in a state of lack of education, lack of medicines, natural disaster. Ya Allah, grant them all safety, security and victory for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, do not allow tonight to pass unless we have pledged allegiance towards the Palestinian cause and found some way to assist them tangibly and measurably. And we ask you, Ya Allah, in the last moments of our life, we die in the love of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
This is the beginning of what we will be getting, inshallah, from our resident army. Mr. Galloway gave us his background from where he started from. And if you look in the question time, during the Prime Minister's time, the entire cabinet that is sitting up in the front are millionaires. Now, compare that to Mr. Galloway, who comes from a very poor background, where he is right now and how much fight he has put in. Now, when somebody tells you from the establishment that they are there for the working class people, and Cameron was asked, what is the price of a loaf? And he didn't even know that. He said, my wife does buy it. So it just goes to show what we are up against and how they can ever connect to people who are suffering. The issue on Palestine. And Palestine is an issue, I think it hurts everyone. You heard Mr. Galloway speak, you heard the Sheikh speak. We have tried, and we keep trying it, and we have to continue trying. Ayatollah Khomeini even started the last Friday in the month of Ramadan to be a food speak for the freeing of Ramadan. It is important for all of us to continue doing that. We think whatever avenues that you are comfortable with, you should be able to do it. And things like not buying stuff that affects directly and goes to the benefit of Israel, that is not a rocket science.
leaflets at the back.
Yeah, it's fine. But let's see, leaflets can come in. The question is, like the Sheikh is saying, the desire to do it. We hear about it, we listen about it, but is there a desire? We go back to our normal day-to-day life and we forget what's going on. And the plight there is like it's a prison. It's a prison for all people. They can't come out. Like you say, there are people dying on the border. And yet we don't hear anything about it in the Western papers because it doesn't suit. So Palestine is a cause that doesn't need to be reminded. It's something that should become of a default position of fighting every time. Every time you go and buy something in the supermarket, have a look at it. See where it's coming out. And I think if you start doing that on a regular basis, inshallah, you'll be able to do something about it. And then at the end of the day, if you're asked, what have you done for Palestine, you can at least say you've done something about it. On the question of Syria, Syria had a long civilization. And the reason, as Galloway mentioned, is something that stood up against the establishment. It was something that was not something that the establishment wanted to do. And that's the reason they are dividing the country up. They created the problem. They're now realizing that the people they're supporting are even worse than what is there already. Now, in all this power struggle, we have to look at the people who are suffering. Unfortunately, the government has made it so difficult that for us to support Syria directly is because there is an element of terrorism involved. So we are very different. We can't really go and fund anything that we are not sure of. What the World Federation does is there are refugees in Lebanon that we fund them, that we help them, we give them financial help, we give them all kinds of help that is required. And that's where our sort of attention is focused on. They are the ones who are living in the camp, and the conditions there are deplorable. I mean, in the snow, if you see some of the photographs that are coming through, there is a thick snow, and all they're having is a t-shirt to wear. They don't even have enough clothes. And there is tremendous amount of help that is required. And each and every one of us living in a comfort here can never appreciate it. But it is something that you really have to work hard. Just like Palestinian, Syrian issue is another one that really has to be worked on. He also spoke about sectarianism, which is an up and coming. Sectarianism is no more from distant land. It is coming home. People who are going out to fight in Syria are returning. We've already seen on Hyderi Road what happened when the demonstration happened. And there was already a sectarianism there. And it's going to get worse. We have to be aware of it. We have to understand how to fight it, how we make the government aware of the sectarianism problem, how do we lobby around peace, because it is now coming home. They're all coming back home again. Once the Syrian war over, they will all come back. And you've seen likes of Mosque and everybody who have been charged again. Whatever the reasons there are, but the problem is not going away. In conclusion, let me thank my esteemed friend, Mr. George Galloway, for having taken time out from his busy schedule, and you can see him speaking all over the place. He's a person who is in demand in all ways. And he's taken time to come and explain to us, and sort of shown us his passion of the Palestinian cause. He has a charity here that he's got information on, and I think we should be supporting the charity. Let me also thank Sheikh Jaffer Ladak for his time, for coming from far. He's not our resident alim yet, but he did manage to come. And again, if you see the passion that is got, we are lucky that we are getting some other alim that we will really learn more from. And he's the one who is really going to start pricking our conscience. And that's exactly what is required, is to prick our conscience. We are too much in a comfort zone. We speak about it, we look at it, but we need somebody from the pulpit who can take a stand and explain to us. For your information, like I think you may not have taken at the time, but Mr. George Galloway appears in 2 televisions. He's on one on Press TV, which is, I understand, Thursday, and it gets repeated on Friday. And on the Russian TV, he's there from Fajr till about 10:30 in the evening. And I thank you all for listening to us. And I'm sorry that not everybody got the chance to sort of get your questions through. Inshallah, we will try and call Mr. Galloway again, and we'll have another chance and then keep the program longer. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Of course you can. Of course you can.
I just wanted to thank you for the invitation. I have to do many things in life which are duties, but this was a pleasure. It's very close to where I live. I didn't have to travel far. I met some wonderful people and reacquainted myself with some old friends. And I have heard thousands of sheikhs and imams. I heard a real superstar sheikh here. You are very lucky. Not just because of the skill with which he communicates, but the depth of learning, knowledge, spirituality which he exudes. It's really striking for me, and I'm not often so struck. So I wish him from August onwards long and successful work here, and I'm sure that that's going to be very valuable for your community, but for all the communities that live around here and indeed in the broader London area. And should I go into London politics, I look forward to working with the Sheikh very closely. I just wanted to make one last point, because I was conscious that I didn't convey enough of what people can do. This is not I'm not involved with Help My Cause, except that my former personal assistant, very highly esteemed, Caroline, who is there and who arranged this program. This is her organization, and she's raising money for Interpal, for the Palestinian people. And I think you know Interpal very well from your footballing time, and they are people worth supporting. There are not many organizations that I'd encourage you to donate to, but I do encourage you to donate to them. But here's one point. We go to Westfield a lot. I don't know if you go to Westfield. It's a very good shopping mall at Shepherd's Bush. In Westfield, there is a stall, you could call it. It's not a shop. It's in the middle of the mall. It's an Israeli stall. It doesn't say Israel on it. They're selling cosmetics. And they stop everyone who goes by. And if they can get you to stop, they persuade you to buy from Dead Sea products, which is illegally occupied land, right through the whole gamut of cosmetics. They are very big in cosmetics. Places like Estee Lauder and so on, that many, many women, even Muslim women, are wearing. These perfumes, they are haram anyway because there's alcohol in them, but they are widely bought, and they are benefiting the Zionist state. But worse than that, the people who are running this stall in Westfield, by stall I don't mean a table, I mean it's quite a highly polished thing. Once they get talking to you, then they tell you they're Israeli. Then they start arguing up Israel's corner. They start engaging you politically. They start to talk about the Palestinian terrorists and so on and so on and so on. They don't do it with me now because they know who I am, but other members of my family have been accosted by these people. Now, what's my point? My point is that there are some times when at least 50% of the people in Westfield are Muslims. At least 50%, sometimes more. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's out of the elements and it's a good place to shop and so on. But there are vast crowds of Muslims in Westfield. But nobody ever, other than me and my family, I have never seen anybody tell these people that they are thieves, that they are killers, that they shouldn't be here, that Westfield shouldn't allow them to be here. As it happens, Westfield is owned by a Zionist Australian who used to fight in the Israeli army, so that's why they're there. Now, I'm not not saying boycott Westfield because I don't boycott it myself. But if you pass these people, tell them, without getting yourself arrested, the contempt that you feel for their apartheid state, and encourage others to do so. Believe me, it would get them down if 1,000 Muslims a day cursed them as they went by their store. So be proactive in your boycotting. Make sure that you're not. You put it so beautifully, Sheikh. Make sure that you're not contributing even an atom. I know the words were Tolistans, but not contributing even an atom. You might be able on the last day to say, I didn't know. But you have an obligation to try to know. You really do, and there's no shortage of sites and sources of knowledge that will tell you, as I just did about Estee Lauder, and there are many, many hundreds, thousands of others. Veolia, which is collecting your bins, is up to its neck in the crimes of the Zionist state. And why Lambeth is dealing with them is something we should raise. If I was the Mayor of London, there would be no Veolia collecting bins anywhere in London. I can assure you of that. So be proactive in searching ways that you can weaken them. Because if you're weakening them, you're strengthening us. You're strengthening the Palestinian cause. If you can just take $1 each out of their pockets, that will add up. There are many of us, and they are few. So, instead of you thanking me, I really want to thank you. I have to go to Dorset early in the morning to film for the Tony Blair documentary. I'm going to be waterboarded. The torture that they impose in Guantanamo Bay. So please remember me in your prayers and hope that the waterboarder is not actually working for the enemy and keeps on pouring, because I have some trepidation. I can face many things, but having water poured down my throat and nose is not something I'm looking forward to, but it will help the film, so that's why I'm going. So I do have to go, if you'll forgive me, quite swiftly, because I have to be on the road to Dorset at dawn. Thank you very much indeed for now. Sheikh Jaffer.